Hey guys, in today's video it'll be another tropical update just like yesterday. And I decided to make this video so soon afterwards because I was actually just looking at the NHC's website this morning, just literally a few minutes ago, and I was like, huh, the Atlantic disturbance that NHC is watching, they have bumped it up to 20% chance of forming within the next 2 to 5 days. And that is because a broad non-tropical low-pressure system has formed a few hundred miles east of the coast of North Carolina. Although cloudiness and shower activity are currently disorganized, the system could still briefly acquire some subtropical characteristics tonight and early Monday while the low moves northeastward over the warm waters of the Gulf Stream. By Monday night and Tuesday, however, the system is expected to weaken when it moves back over the cooler waters of the North Atlantic. So, of course, the chances are still really not that high, though it has been bumped up by another 10% for both the 2 and 5 days, and you can see it's starting to get within its area, within the area that it could potentially develop. So we'll really have to keep an eye on this, and I guess there is a bit higher of a chance that we could see our next named storm in the Atlantic a little sooner than expected. I don't really think it will actually be named, but who knows? It's 2020, honestly. Anything is possible. That's really what I'm going with this year. 2020, anything is possible, especially for this year's hurricane season. But honestly, I think that goes really in general. But I also want to look at the Eastern Pacific side because going along with yesterday's video, I showed you that the NHC is watching three areas of three disturbances in the Eastern Pacific. The first disturbance has a 10% chance of forming within the next 2 days and a 30% chance of forming within the next 5 days. It says a broad area of low pressure located more than 1,000 miles southwest of the southern tip of the Baja California Peninsula is producing disorganized showers and thunderstorms. Environmental conditions could support some slow development of the system during the next few days while the disturbance moves generally westward. So we'll have to keep an eye on this because the models, especially the GFS, has been showing that this system could actually form into our next named East-Pacific system. And actually, in fact, this second disturbance now has a medium chance of development with a 20% chance of forming within the next 2 days and a 40% chance of forming within the next 5 days. It says a low-pressure system is producing a broad area of showers and thunderstorms several hundred miles south of the southwestern coast of Mexico. Some gradual development of the system is possible through the middle of the week while it moves westward, away from the coast of Mexico. And then the third system now... I want to go back. The third, sorry about that. The third disturbance that the NHC is watching in the Eastern Pacific, that's actually going to be traveling right off the coast of Mexico. Says another area of disturbed weather is forecast to form south of the coast of Mexico by the middle of this week. Additional development could then occur as the system moves west-northwest parallel to the coast of Mexico. It doesn't have any chance of forming within the next 2 days. That's just because the actual system hasn't fully formed yet. But the next 5 days, a 30% chance of development. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. So now let's check and see what the models are showing. We're going to first look at the Atlantic system with what the GFS is showing for it. And you can see it right there. Definitely looks already kind of more towards a subtropical system in nature. And as we head forward in time, you can see it starts to move northward, and then it really dissipates by the time we get to tomorrow evening into tomorrow night. So we'll just have to see within the next really 12 hours, or no, what am I saying? Within the next day. Yeah, within the next day. Sorry about that. Within the next day, this system has the best shot of forming, really. After that, it'll just be gone. Let's see what the European model is showing for this system. Let's look for this model. Let's look at the vorticity. Vorticity would... Oh, wait, what the hell is this? No. here, vorticity, sorry about that. You can see it shows the system kind of getting a little bit better. Sorry about that. Oh, sorry, my allergies acting up. The European model shows this system starting to get somewhat better organized with its vorticity, getting up towards 20 to maybe 30 knots. So there's that. We can actually, let's quickly look at what the European model is really showing with the precipitation on pivotal weather, just so you guys have a better look at things. Let's see. Let's go to forecast loop, and we will start to head this out more forward in time. You can see the European model really gets it down towards 1,009 millibars. So I guess there is a chance that it could become a very weak subtropical storm. There is that chance, but otherwise, really, it most likely will just head northeastward in the general track that it has been, and then it'll just dissipate within the next few days, or next couple days, more like. All right, now let's look at what the CMC is showing, because that's actually a lot more important. All right, so the CMC, you can see it shows the system right here. Move this farther out into time, and doesn't really show it getting all that much organized. It actually shows it, I think, the weakest out of what the GFS and Euro and CMC are all showing. Shows it the weakest out of all three of those models. So let's look at the vorticity for the system, and you can see, yeah, it's really not really showing too much well-defined vorticity with it. Yeah, the Atlantic system really it's not really showing too much in terms of potential, and honestly, it's not too much of a surprise, really, but you know. We'll just have to see. All right, let's look at what the GFS is showing for the East Pacific systems. So you can see that there's the first one out here, the second one out here, and then the third one will form as we head farther out into time. So here's that first system, actually getting pretty well defined there, getting down to 994 millibars. Yeah, getting down pretty low, actually, 991. So it actually does look like it will strengthen a good bit, that first system, potentially, according to the GFS. And then let's see the second system. Doesn't look like the GFS is really showing it strengthening all that much. So maybe it'll become a weak tropical storm, named tropical storm at most, but not really looking too good. But the third system, got to move this farther out into time. Really looks like the third system will really start to make its presence, really show its presence going towards the end of this upcoming week. And then you can see the low, sorry about that. And the low forms, and it actually does strengthen a good bit, gets down to around 996 millibars, I believe that says, or 998 millibars, actually, I think. And then it kind of weakens as it heads back up and gets, actually, the GFS kind of shows it getting into within the Baja California, that stretch of water between the Baja California and Mexico. I forget what it's called, honestly. But yeah. Oh, and then actually, speaking of which, the GFS is hinting at a much stronger system going farther out into time, going into early July, but let's not really focus on that right now. Though, really, I think generally the gist of things for the Eastern Pacific now is that it will really start to try and ramp up with activity. And it looks like it will give us at least one or two more storms within the next couple weeks, especially within the next week. we'll see this first disturbance potentially actually form into a decently strong tropical system. That second disturbance may form into a weak tropical system, but I'm not really counting on that at all. That third system, though, could actually become next named system for the Eastern Pacific. So we could see 2, maybe 3 named storms for the Eastern Pacific within the next week and a half, maybe 2 weeks or so. So now let's look at what the European model is showing for these systems. Move this farther out, and you can see it shows very good vorticity for that first disturbance, as I was saying. So the European model is definitely agreeing with the GFS. That second system really is not, it's not really showing too good vorticity with it, but does look like it's agreeing with the GFS with the fact that it could maybe become a weak tropical storm. But let's look at what it's showing for the third system. It shows decent vorticity for it, so there is that. But yeah, it's not looking great for the third system, but that's generally because it's farther out towards the end of the run for this run of the European, so it's not all too accurate. But it is showing that third system, but we'll have to see. Let's look at the CMC, what it's showing with it, and we can actually look at the precipitation the CMC is showing for it. And you can see, why is it not, CMC is very strange with this, actually. It's like barely showing, it's kind of showing the first and second system, definitely a lot weaker than what the European and GFS model are showing for those two systems, but the third system, it really shows it cranking up and really getting actually quite strong, surprisingly. That's very interesting. But yeah, I guess yeah, the general gist for the Eastern Pacific hurricane season now, within the next couple of weeks, especially within this next week, is that the activity will start to really try and ramp up a bit. So we could definitely see our next 2, maybe 3 named systems for the Eastern Pacific within that time. The Atlantic, still, I do think that our next named systems, our next real chance for our next named systems for the Atlantic will be once all that Saharan dust moves out of here, gets into the U.S. and moves on, and then the Kelvin wave will move in, which I believe is now starting to enter the Eastern Pacific. Should enter the Atlantic by this weekend, and then it'll take a few days for the conditions to really get fully favorable for systems to start to be monitored for actual development. So I think the next good chance for the Atlantic, for the next named systems for the Atlantic, will be once the Kelvin wave moves in, and then it'll be towards the very end of June into very early July. So I'm going with between June 30th and July 5th will be our next good chance for potential development for our next tropical systems in the Atlantic. And then I do think, though, that especially for right now, at least the earlier half of July, we could see a good amount of named storms for the Atlantic. I am thinking that this July could be one of the more active Julys we've seen in the recent few years. But I think within the first few weeks of July, I think we could see another two to three systems form, and then we'll just have to see how it goes getting into the end of July and then into the peak of the season, which is and getting into August and September. Man, I can't believe we're honestly getting pretty close to the peak already. Already kind of starting to eyeball that time frame. But yeah, the Atlantic is quiet for now, but will start to ramp up within the next week and a half to 2 weeks. But the Eastern Pacific really looks like we'll be starting to see some more activity in the Eastern Pacific very soon. So yeah, we'll just keep an eye out for that, and I hope you enjoyed. That's the end of this video. Really hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, subscribe below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.